Hello, Scott here, and welcome to Holy an actual review? Working title? Yes, I have left the comfort zone of unboxings, first impressions, and deep dives in order to try my hand of an actual review of an RPG that I have played. And I gotta admit, this was no easy task. Come to find out, doing a video review of an RPG is hard. With the scripting, with the reading, and making sure you don't sound like a fifth grader giving a graduation commencement speech. Yes, so hopefully it all came together and it turns out okay, and I might do more of these depending on the feedback that I get, but who knows? It might crash and burn like an airplane over Germany during World War II. So who knows? But without further ado, let's get into my first review, and that will be The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow. So several months ago, my local group decided they want to try a new game. And they wanted to do something, fantasy related, dungeony and dragony, but I really wasn't in the mood to run 5th edition for them. So after throwing several suggestions their way, they decided they want to try Old School Essentials, and thus begin the task of finding an introductory adventure that would go good for a group who has never played something like that before. And after much looking, getting some suggestions and whatnot, I came across The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow, and after taking a few quick glances at it, I figured this was the perfect game for an introductory OSR adventure. The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow is an 82-page adventure penned by Joseph R. Lewis, published by the Merry Mushman, and designed for Old School Essentials. While it embraces the whimsical fairy tale and eerie folklore aesthetic of Dolmenwood, it can easily be adapted to any OSR-style game, or with little work, any fantasy RPG of your choosing. It is recommended for PCs of levels 1 to 2, and the adventure itself presents it as an excellent introduction for GMs and players new to OSR games. Whoa there, hold on a minute. If I've learned anything from other YouTubers who do tabletop RPG reviews, it's yes, there are going to be spoilers. I am reviewing an adventure, and that means if you're a player, you do not want to watch this, send this to your game master, have them take a look at it. But from here on out, there's going to be spoilers. That should be obvious. Now back to the review. The adventure begins in a quaint little town called Ragged Hollow. This is where the PCs will find the village in a complete panic, as their local temple has suddenly been covered in an impenetrable dome of shimmering gold, and the locals are desperate to break through, as several of the townsfolk, clergy members, and children are trapped within. What the PCs and townfolk don't know is the dome was invoked to protect the village from an evil that was growing within. Several days pass, a would-be adventurer named Tobias went to investigate an old dwarf tomb in the mountains to the west. There he became infected with a dark force called the Dolores Ichor. In fear for his life, he fled back to the village to seek help from the Temple of Halcyon. Unable to help Tobias and the growing violence of his possession, they locked him in the cells underneath. To help soothe his madness, a brother of the temple laid the crown of dreams upon his head, but the viral parasite took control of the crown and brought forth a nightmarish hellscape to wreak havoc within the village and the temple. In desperation, the paladin Lady Constance invoked the Golden Veil of Halcyon to seal the temple and prevent the madness and monsters from within from spreading. So there you have a fairly interesting setup to a beginning adventure for a fantasy role-playing game. But what makes The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow different is it has a way of adding a particular amount of tension to the adventure in a very, very interesting way. So after the first day of your player characters interacting with the NPCs, exploring the village, trying to find some clues as to what was the cause of this particular event, when they take their rests at night, at midnight, the bell tower will ring 36 times. And every night after that, for the first week, it will also ring 36 times. But on the evening of the first day of the next week, it will ring less, as 1d4 random NPCs trapped within the temple will fall to the evil within. Once the player characters find out that this is the cause of the bells ringing, they now know that they do not have a lot of time left to figure out how to get in and stop what is going on within the Temple of Halcyon. Likewise, they will soon notice that the golden shield that is keeping all of the madness trapped within the walls of the temple is slowly shrinking. Therefore, the evil will be let loose upon the world. The location of Ragged Hollow itself is your standard fantasy village with a variety of the usual locations. There's a tavern, an inn, blacksmith, shopkeepers, abandoned mansion, a cellar with rats in it, but each with a special amount of quirkiness to make them stand outside of the usual fantasy tropes. The NPCs really shine in variety, as the PCs will meet all sorts of personalities that will provide them with rumors, side quests, and even join up on their adventures. The bulk of the adventure involves the player characters exploring the 3 hex areas that surround Ragged Hollow. There's a fairy tale wood called Gloamwood, a treacherous range called the Bleak Mountains, and a dusty landscape of thief-riddled crags called the Wailing Hills. It is here that the adventurers will find a cavalcade of NPCs, monsters, treasures, magic items, and answers as to what happened within the walls of the Temple of Halcyon. If the player characters are skilled enough and smart enough to survive the surrounding treacherous landscapes, they will eventually find a way within the Temple of Halcyon, which is the equivalent of a 6-level dungeon, and discover that the nightmares within are worse than can be imagined, as they now struggle to find and save any remaining survivors and hopefully stop the spread of the Dolores Ichor. And there you have The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow. Now, let's get into some ballyhooing and bellyaching. Now, as to the bones of the book, The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow is exceptional in its presentation. The writing by Joseph Lewis, there's no shortage of imagination within every single page. The artwork by Leanne is evocative, and even though it does kind of carry a bit of what I would call maybe a bit of a cartoony aspect to it, it's not comical. It does evoke the fairy tale folklorish aspect of what has been presented within a lot of the pages of other old school essential adventures, and also evokes the general world where OSE comes from, and that's within the forests of Dolmenwood. And then finally, the maps by Rob Matthews and Nobach, clear, concise, well illustrated, and there was no issue as far as following the different aspects of the maps and providing that information from what was before me and giving it to the players, providing them a living, breathing world that they were going through. Another thing that really made The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow stand out was the welcome message that you see when you first open the book. It provides an excellent primer if you're new to the OSR that tells you and guides you, the GM, and the players on how to conduct an OSR-style game so your players get the most of what it's like to play an old-school adventure. So now for the nitpicks. Now, mind you, they are far and few between. There's only going to be a couple, and with it comes a bit of a recommendation if you're going to run the game. The first one is the appendix in the back of the book, which lists all of the magical items. Well, not all of them, and thus the nitpick. They're essentially all of the major magic items that they will pick up or may pick up during the course of the adventure, essentially what you would consider maybe artifacts, but they miss a few key things that the player characters will encounter and pick up throughout the book. Things such as magical fruit, quirky little items they may pick up at a place called the Goblin Market, and likewise little minor items that are considered magical but aren't within this appendix. Again, this is why it's a nitpick, but there were several instances within the game where I couldn't rely on the bookkeeping of my player characters to keep tabs on their magical items. And as this is presented as an introduction to running an OSR-style game, and organization tends to be key in regards to that, it would be nice to have that appendix complete with everything within the adventure, not just these key artifacts. And not the fault of the creators of this game, of course, because that's on me and the players, but they're aware of it, as we all are, and relying on them to keep tabs on everything can sometimes be hair pulling. And it would have been beneficial to have everything listed in the appendix, that is magical within this adventure. So another problem that I came across while running this adventure was there is some interconnectivity issues. Several of the locations that your players will go to will reference other locations that they may have been to or will eventually discover, likewise referencing items and callbacks to NPCs. And unfortunately, some of these were disjointed. So if I can make a recommendation, definitely read through this adventure in its entirety. Make notes of these instances and definitely make sure that they do connect one way or another. That way, you don't come across the issue that I had of stalling the game as you're doing the horrible aspect that all GMs have gone through of pausing the game and flipping through the book, trying to find out what exactly is going on. Now with the ballyhooing and bellyaching out of the way, comes the most important aspect of a review. Did I enjoy running it and did my players have fun? And the answer to both those questions are yes. Absolutely. The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow was a joy to run, and the players had an absolute blast. They were exceptionally surprised at the fact that they had such a good time playing old school adventures, utilizing this as their introduction, that they wanted to come back for more. And thus, I picked up more adventures from the Merry Mushmen to run for them at our next session. Again, if you are looking for a wonderful adventure as an introduction to players new to the OSR, I personally think you can't do any better than picking up a copy of The Nightmare Over Ragged Hollow and use this as a pathway to the adventures that lie within old school role-playing. Thank you. Phew! And thus ends my first review. If you enjoyed this review, please let me know in the comments. Feel free to contact me on all my socials. Hopefully, I did a good job with the review, and more importantly, I hope I did this fine adventure the justice it deserves. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.